What's going on, everyone? Today we're breaking down all things about the new look 2025 Las Vegas Raiders, including if you should be hammering Ashton Jeanty in round 1 of fantasy drafts, if Brock Bowers is deserving of round 2 treatment, just how high is the ceiling for wide receiver 1 Jakobi Meyers, and what should we make of new QB1 Geno Smith in his first year under new head coach Pete Carroll. All that and so much more here on today's Fantasy Life show. And accordingly, I am joined by the one, the only Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain the Rock McFarland. And Dwain, we'll go ahead and start things off with the guy carrying the lowest ADP in all of Fantasyland on the Raiders right now, and that is 6th overall pick Ashton Jeanty, someone who I know with your work with the rookie RB supermodel over at FantasyLife.com really does have one of the greatest profiles that we have seen in quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely. So he graded out as a 91 rating in the rookie supermodel. Guys, here are his comps: Saquon Barkley, Leonard Fournette, Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, and Jahmyr Gibbs.
Pretty good.
Yeah. So going to be really good. It's a matter of when. And I do think that's an argument. When I look at the Raiders backfield, I see a pretty clear path to them just feeding this guy. Raheem Mostert, yeah, he might pick up a few carries here and there, but I think we got a shot at Jeanty getting 65, 70% of this workload. Now, having said all that, Christian McCaffrey's on this list. Christian McCaffrey wasn't a high-end running back 1 his rookie season. You know, Saquon was. Yeah. Leonard Fournette was a running back 1, but not like an elite one his first season. Bijan Robinson, just a couple years ago, Ian, people remember the pain of drafting Bijan Robinson in the first round, even though he's on this list and he's ended up being a really good fantasy player. If you drafted Bijan in round 1 2 years ago, you weren't happy with your return versus some of the other players that you could have taken in that range. So I get folks that want to look at Jeanty and say, yeah, he's really good, and I get it. He's going to be one of the best running backs in the league. But, like, what's he going to do really in year 1? And so I can totally understand that question. The way I'm looking at it, Ian, I do have Barkley and Bijan as locks over him. And then I really have a tier of backs. And it's Gibbs at the top of it, but then it's Jeanty, Achane, and CMC. All of these guys can catch passes. All of these guys can carry it between the tackles. All these guys can break big plays. Now, CMC, we'll see if the big playability is still there, but assuming that's still there, even if it's not, he's going to offset it so much with his ability to catch passes out of the backfield that, like, we're kind of nitpicking here. So it's a tier of guys that really can do everything. But I think it's fair where you want to place Jeanty in that group. If you want to place him at the top of the group, I think it's fine. It could work out. If you want to place him at the bottom of the group and be a little bit more cautious with Jeanty, I can also understand that. So interested to hear your thoughts. We know he's a great prospect. We know he's eventually, going to be most likely going to be a very strong running back 1 candidate. I'm putting my chip on it happening this year. But where do you land?
I think anywhere between RB3 and RB7 is fine. I've had him rank, as high as RB3 after the draft, and it was just like, yeah, this guy could have 400 touches feasibly this year. But I think I've actually settled on him more so closer to that RB7 behind the guys you mentioned. And also I would put Derrick Henry in there, mainly because, look, I think all these guys are really freaking good talents, okay? Is Ashton Jeanty better than all of them? I don't know. He could be, I guess. What he did last year at Boise State was freaking special. But what I kind of have trouble with is saying this Raiders offense, one that is still very much projected to be a below average scoring group. Look at the groups we got to compete with, man. The Eagles, the Lions, the Falcons are a little bit, iffy. So I hear you there with Bijan versus Jeanty. The Ravens, the Dolphins offense, where you seem just be 1 year removed from a top 2 finish. I mean, it is a situation where, again, that scoring upside for Jeanty in Las Vegas, that's the more concerning part for me. So that is why I have him close to the RB7. I will say, though, man, the price has started to drop a little bit. He's still going RB5 in drafts, but he's getting actually finally close to that kind of round 1, round 2 turn, going next to guys like Henry and Achane. So now I have been dabbling a bit more with Jeanty in these early stages of drafts. I just struggle to kind of be like, oh my gosh, yeah, screw Derrick Henry, get Devon Achane out of here. It needs to be Ashton Jeanty. So some of the workload arguments for Saquon and these guys, couldn't we kind of make that with Jeanty too, Dwain? I mean, how many freaking touches did this dude just have at Boise? Obviously taking, different contact from collegiate defenders versus NFL guys. But again, like you kind of started with, not every stud rookie running back who went on to have a great career was immediately that great in year 1. You actually look at the running back selected in the top 10 going back to 2010. Hilarious tidbit. CJ Spiller got top 10 draft capital from the Bills, played 14 games, had 98 total touches that year. Shout out Fred Jackson for keeping him on the bench. But since then, again, it's been very good. Trent Richardson, RB5 as a rookie, even though he was considered a bust. Todd Gurley, RB5. Zeke was RB3. McCaffrey, as you mentioned, not exactly a world beater, RB13. Fournette, RB7. Saquon, RB2. And then Bijan, RB17. So far more good than bad, but man, we are literally already buying him like he's going to be this top 5 running back, which he could be, but relative to some of the guys we've seen do it before, and then also these just stud young wide receivers, I haven't been completely going out of my way to get Jeanty so far.
Yeah, I've got him on like 15%. So if you think basically you have an 8% chance, all things being equal, you don't necessarily have an 8% chance, but if there's 12 teams in a draft and you could be one of the teams that draft Jeanty, I'm above, like, where I should be. Yeah. Not where I should be, but I mean, I'm drafting him more often than just average. So I haven't been really worried about it at all. I agree. If I were to have one concern, it would more be the Raiders offense. But typically, where that really worries me is if we have someone that we don't think can catch passes out of the backfield. And we saw Jeanty and what he did his sophomore season as a pass catcher out of the backfield at Boise State. And this dude was just he did some really great work. Again, not on the level of a CMC and a Kamara, but like that next level down, like probably Austin Eckler, Achane-esque. Like I do think that Jeanty can work in that range. So I think the targets are going to be there. Obviously, we've got Brock Bowers is going to get his, Jakobi Meyers. We'll talk about those two guys, but I think there's still there'll still be targets to go to the running backs. And if you're playing in these trailing game scripts and defenses are just inviting you to throw the ball to your back, I think it will be Ashton Jeanty on the field. So PPR, half PPR, I think that kind of protects him. I think in a standard league, Ian, you could make an argument that you would potentially move someone like Derrick Henry ahead of Ashton Jeanty if you wanted, if you felt like that you didn't want to carry the risk of what exactly will the touchdowns look like for Jeanty, but you're going to add risk of Derrick Henry, being another year older. Now, he hasn't shown any signs of that, but we can't always predict when these guys are going to hit the cliff. Sometimes we call it the cliff because it's not a hill, guys. It's not a gradual downturn. It's a cliff because it goes from you're way up here to all of a sudden you're way down here. And so I think we can nitpick a lot of these guys. And to your point, Christian McCaffrey, even though he finished outside the top 12 running backs his rookie season, he was sharing with a guy that a lot of you guys, if you're younger, new to our audience, you may not know Jonathan Stewart. The dude was a baller. He just was injured throughout his career, but this was a really good player. And so he was kind of standing in the way of McCaffrey. You look at Jahmyr Gibbs, he was splitting a backfield with Dave Montgomery. But the guys that have stepped into situations like what we have with Jeanty, where we can pretty safely, I think, Ian, project this guy for one of the bigger workloads in the NFL. I feel pretty good about it. I can't disagree, though, that it might be 8 touchdowns, right? He might not have the upside of seeing 15 rushing touchdowns. We would really need to see the Raiders overperform as an offense based on where the current win total is set from Vegas and things like that.
I love the shout out you gave, though, with his receiving work as a sophomore, because Boise really did go out of their way to try to break that Barry Sanders rushing record during his junior year last time we saw him. But man, 569 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns, and the per route efficiency was McCaffrey-esque, Dwain. You go back a decade, and the only FBS running backs who averaged north of 3 yards per route run on at least 40 targets, Christian McCaffrey, Jahmyr Gibbs, and yes, Ashton Jeanty himself as well. So again, it's one of these situations when we're talking about any first round pick, it's like, I don't want to say I'm fading Ashton Jeanty. I have him ranked as the 7th best running back in the NFL before he's taken a snap. But guess what? If you want to go ahead and get him at his top 5 price, going to have to be a little bit higher on him than I am right now. So we'll see what goes on there. But obviously, there is another stud in this offense, and we have already seen him return that sort of production. His name is Brock Bowers, of course, going in round 2 of fantasy drafts. Hand up, Dwain. I have not been getting a ton of Brock Bowers. There's nothing really against him. I fully understand why people are treating him as the tight end 1 in Fantasyland after he just had, I think we can all say the best rookie season ever at the position. But man, when he got Trey McBride going a handful of picks later and kind of actually existing at that tier break of running backs and wide receivers, I prefer that value. And I really prefer George Kittle going a full round and a half later. You can even get him in round 4 in some of these streets. So have you been willing to pay up for Bowers, even though we have 2 fellow studs in McBride and Kittle going a little bit later?
Yeah, man, I'm similar to you, and this could end up being wrong. I'm drafting enough teams that I still need to go back and get exposure to Brock Bowers, right? You and I've talked about this. Like what we do a lot early in drafts is, why draft this guy when I can get this same guy, like 2 or 3 rounds later? And I think there's good reasoning with that. And if you're playing in a home league, you might want to play it that way. Why not take George Kittle in round 4, with less target competition probably that he's had in the last 3 to 4 years versus, having to take Brock Bowers in round 2. But if you're going to draft 100 best ball teams, you should be drafting some Brock Bowers in round 2. I think the challenge starts to become also some of the receivers, man, that go in that range. Like if you made me choose today, as much as I love Brock Bowers, but you made me choose between him and A.J. Brown, which guy has the best chance to throw up 1,600 yards and 12 touchdowns, it's AJB because he's just working further down the field, and all it takes is the Eagles decide, and they're just not going to run the ball quite as much as they did last year. So Bowers mostly working as an underneath target. So maybe we'll see another gear develop to his game. I hope we do. He's great as a yak guy, yards per route run, all these underlying metrics about Bowers, a 26% target share, Ian, they all scream tight end 1. This guy did this stuff as a rookie. He had a 91 utilization score on a scale of 0 to 100. Ooh. So he's in that high-end tight end 1 range, 15.5 fantasy points per game. You mentioned it, all those numbers right there with Trey McBride, who goes at the end of round 2, so a little bit cheaper. But I do believe if you're drafting a bunch of teams, you definitely need exposure to Bowers in the middle of round 2. He was going at the beginning of round 2, like as recently as like a month ago in a lot of these best ball drafts. I wasn't getting very much of him then, Ian, because again, then you're talking about having to take him over names like Achane. As much as I like Bowers, in a pure run out, Achane can win you your whole league. It could score 25 fantasy points per game. Explosive playmaker that's very involved in the pass game. Brock Bowers, like an elite run out, even though he gives you an advantage over tight ends in your league, right? We're hoping for, could he get to 17, 18 fantasy points per game? 20 is probably the ceiling, in a PPR setup, which can still be really good, but it's not the same league breaking level that you have with an HM. But now that he's settled in the middle of round 2, and sometimes he goes a little past the middle of round 2. That's where I've been starting to take a little bit more because I could see it being a scenario where we look back and it's like, oh man, I just took Trey McBride because he was cheaper. I just took George Kittle because he was cheaper. I mean, man, all 3 of those guys are really good, but Brock Bowers ends up being the guy that you wish you had.
And that is one of the lessons I've, had to learn the hard way over the years. There's nothing wrong with prioritizing someone like Kittle. Again, he's a great player and obviously has a great fantasy profile in his own right. But just because we think Kittle is a cheaper version than Bowers doesn't mean that the more expensive version can't go absolutely nuclear in his own right. So You are right. He's sliding down. I still see guys like Jonathan Taylor and Bucky Irvin going right behind him, have been taking those running backs over Bowers more times than not. But again, man, we've talked about kind of tier breaks after the top 11 wide receivers, after the top, 9 or 10 or so running backs. That's where McBride's going. If we get Bowers and McBride neck and neck, man, I will happily kind of split that exposure with them. Hasn't been the case so far. That is why I have a bit more Trey McBride. So overall, just kind of looking back at Bowers' rookie season, I don't really have many red flags. Honestly, the one funny thing I had looking back was he only forced 4 missed tackles, and that was kind of his calling card at Georgia. So on the one hand, you could say oh, that's weird. He wasn't more of a beast after the catch. He was still good, don't get me wrong, but Michael Mayer forced more missed tackles than Brock Bowers last year, which again is just wild to me given the discrepancy and opportunities we had. But I'm kind of thinking maybe he's just scratching the surface of what he can do. The fact he had such a good season and he wasn't even a focal point with that. But we do have a new offense. Obviously, Geno Smith's an upgrade over the quarterbacks. But Chip Kelly, maybe we do see a bit more split usage with Michael Mayer. Mayer was someone who, again, just last year had the personal IR stuff going on, so he wasn't available. He was back down the stretch, and that didn't do anything for Bowers. But again, there has been enough of an offensive change, Dwain, that it's not a guarantee that's going to be for the better. Meanwhile, McBride and Kittle, basically sit in the same exact situations as they were last year. So that would be the only thing here is hey, we have a new offense. And also, again, Raiders below average offense, seeing 2 guys on an offense that we aren't exactly expecting huge fireworks from going inside the top 24 fantasy picks. I don't love that.
Yeah, and it's just because they're both really good talents. I mean, we could be talking about, Brock Bowers, we're already saying, is probably the best tight end in football right now. If not, he's in the top 3. And Ashton Jeanty, by the time we're at week 3, we might be talking about him as a top 3 running back in the league. So, yeah, offense not great, but if they both go nuclear, it's going to help the offense, right? And so like these things, they go hand in hand. It's not like a team, that's really loaded with these good players is typically a terrible offense. So I know we'll get to Geno Smith here in a minute. He's going to have to do his part to make sure that things go well for the Raiders offense this season. But when you look at Bowers, one other thing I would say, the missed tackles force thing, I do look at that as well. But still, the bigger part for me, is the yak was still there. He was more of an underneath target, 6.6 average depth of target, but 5.3 yards after the catch. That's good for that average depth of target. The thing I would like to see from Bowers really again is develop into a guy that's also attacking a little bit more vertically down the field, because that's really what, if you can have a high target share, right, and you can start to work those intermediate ranges of the field, you get the ADOT up. Those are the type of tight ends that can give you those 10 to 15 touchdowns. Typically, the guys that are down, in that 6.5 ADOT, even if they get a ton of targets, Ian, it's super hard for them to get past 5 or 6 touchdowns. So I think the true ceiling, if Brock Bowers were to turn into a break your league type of player, I think that's the next step. Can he also be a guy that can get targets further down the field?
And hey, maybe the fact that I'm saying, why is this potentially below average offense have all these great players going heavy? Maybe it's going to be a better offense than expected. That would make sense again, given some of the talent we have here. So that's not just me. I'm not trying to hate on you guys, Raiders fans, but I will say, based on the Vegas implied point totals, and again, Vegas has many, many millions of reasons to try to be right about this stuff. I mean, we're talking about the 6th lowest implied offense in the league, but hey, certainly are looking better than last year. Let's talk about one of the remaining stalwarts from last year, and that is wide receiver 1, Jakobi Meyers, who these last 2 seasons, Dwain, wide receiver 24 in PPR points per game in 2023 and wide receiver 21 last year. That was while having Davante Adams on the field for large portions of time. And even once Adams left the picture, we still had Brock Bowers, picking up all that number 1 pass catcher slack. So QB upgrading to former Geno Smith. Where do you fall on Jakobi? Because again, proven low-end wide receiver 2 upside in an offense that wasn't as good as what we're kind of expecting now. That said, you bring in Pete Carroll, Chip Kelly, Ashton Jeanty. What makes sense of this version of the Raiders leans a bit more to the run relative to these past years.
Yeah, I mean, if we look after Davante Adams departed from the lineup, and we haven't even gotten to the upgrade that I think we're getting with Geno Smith versus the quarterbacks that we had there last year. But Brock Bowers had a 28% target share. That's absolutely phenomenal. But no one is out here talking about the fact that Jakobi Meyers was at 27%. He was 1 percentage point behind Brock Bowers. And look, guys, we all love Brock Bowers. He did that as a rookie. But Jakobi Meyers is just one of these guys that, for whatever reason, every year seems to be forgotten. Had a utilization score of 81 in, and that's typically associated with a wide receiver 2 finish in fantasy. So I think this is a guy. I mean, he averaged 15.7 fantasy points per game after the departure of Davante Adams. So, I mean, that's a borderline wide receiver 1, guys. So going back to 2011, the average wide receiver 12, so the 12th guy in a 12-team league at wide receiver has averaged 16 fantasy points per game. So he was right there on the borderline of that. And it's not just last year, man. If it was this, and we saw it last year, we would still be calling it out, saying that this is really good, because they haven't added a lot of target competition. Yes, they did draft a couple players, Jack Besh, but man, didn't really grade that well in the supermodel. Film guys really love him, but he hasn't been running that hot in camp. And then we talk about Deontay Thornton. He's really more of a field stretcher. I think Bowers and Myers really are the 2 main guys. And the other part where I was going with this, it's not like this is really new for Jakobi Meyers. Like, he just does this every single year. Jakobi Meyers, Ian, is this like, at this point, is this like the James Conner of wide receivers? Like, everybody just wants to let him fly. Yeah, Tyler Lockett. That's another great one. But if we go back and we look at Jakobi Meyers and what he's done over these last several years, right, the underlying data points have always been right there on that wide receiver 3 to wide receiver 2 range. And so last year we saw him finally break into that wide receiver 2 bucket. I think it's fine to treat him more like a wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 4 in drafts this year. You don't have to force it, because he's not going that high in drafts. But would it surprise us at all if this guy finishes as a wide receiver 2, especially in PPR formats? I think with Myers, he's not like a big playmaker, so you're not gonna like him quite as much in standard formats. But over in PPR, I definitely think there's meat on the bone with how late that you can get Jakobi Meyers right now in your drafts.
currently going wide receiver 40. Last two off seasons, he was going as a wide receiver 53. So again, it is funny that we've gotten the proven production that we would want out of a wide receiver 4, yet he still is that affordable in drafts. So we'll give him credit. 87 receptions last year, 0 drops. That was the most of any player in the NFL per the fine folks at PFF. So Jakobi's someone who I haven't been clicking every single time because you got Jaden Reed, Matthew Golden, Ricky Pearsall, some of these other guys in that range where I don't think Jakobi screams out like I need to be picked ahead of these other dudes, but perfectly viable guy. I think he deserves to be going where he's being drafted. So yeah, Dwain, we are feeling good about Meyers. You kind of went through these other guys though at first. Have you made a habit of drafting really any of them? Because again, this is one of these rare offenses where the tight end is going to most likely be the number 1 pass game target. We love Jakobi as the likely 2. I mean, Jeanty could even be the number 3 before we actually get to one of these other guys.
Well, like I mentioned, they take Jack Bash out of TCU, who had been at LSU before that, in round 2. So obviously they saw something in him. Didn't have a very strong production profile, and that held him down in the supermodel, but did have a really good film grade. And if you listen to a lot of different film people from across the industry, they seem to all be united on that. There were a lot of Jack Bash lovers out there. I would say this: if we hear in training camp that Bash is starting to look better and that he is going to take that kind of power slot role in the offense, that is one thing to remember with Jakobi Meyers. Jakobi Meyers is mostly playing the Z. He does a lot of work intermediate and under, but he does get to kick inside to the slot quite a bit and gets mismatches against linebackers and safeties. We may have to come back and kind of update our view on Jakobi Meyers if Best starts trending in the right direction. But right now we've got round 4 pick Dante Thornton has really been the guy so far when you think back to minicamp that was running ones. And it does make sense from a standpoint of Jakobi Meyers works intermediate underneath so far. Brock Bowers has been an underneath target. They need somebody that can stretch things out. So even though we went later in the draft, this is the guy that has the speed profile that they're looking for. Trey Tucker previously had really held down that role. So it sounds like Dante Thornton Jr. is the guy challenging Trey Tucker for the role on the outside. I don't think there's anything here as far as Thornton, Ian, as far as, drafting him right now, especially in like redraft leagues. Maybe we start to pay more attention to him in best ball if we hear that he's really holding down that role. And then really like Besh is the same thing. Like if Besh, is going to get to play in these 3 wide receiver sets, and we're hearing that he's locking that down, we'll probably change our ranking on him. Right now, I still have him ahead of Thornton just because there's more draft capital with him. But I haven't made a habit, honestly, of clicking on any of the names on this offense outside of Jeanty, Bowers, and Jakobi Meyers.
Of course, the way that some of these complimentary wide receivers could rise up, maybe this offense as a whole, is if Geno Smith keeps on playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Maybe a little bit of a hyperbole there, not top 5 or anything, but guys, seriously, even smarter football minds than myself, of which there are plenty, a lot of them do have Geno ranked as a top 10 league-wide quarterback. Some of the throws he has put on film in Seattle over the past 2 or 3 years truly have been amazing. Dwayne, I tried to make a cut up. I like doing my highlights and posting them on Twitter and stuff. I did one on Geno, good 20 minutes worth, and I was going through to cut them up. Recorded the wrong screen. That was awesome. So I need to go back and do that again. Just 20 minutes of my notes while I was watching highlights alone on the other one. So unfortunate, computer wizardry from your boy aside. Geno Smith, certainly someone who's made so many great throws, man. Again, gave him a shout out on the Seahawks pod where when we were going back and watching all the JSN catches from last year, so many times it was like, oh my God, what another freaking throw by Geno Smith. So curiously, man, I mean, he's being priced alongside guys like Aaron Rodgers at the very bottom of the QB ranks. I mean, Geno Smith, man, if you had to pick one of these quarterbacks going like outside the top 20, I think you can make a case Geno has the best odds to actually finish as a legit QB1.
Yeah, I mean, gets to play in the dome now. Going to have less issues with weather, so that's a positive. I think that tends to get overblown, but I mean, it's a plus. And the thing with Geno is this: his last 3 seasons, Ian, here are his average passing yards per game: 252, 242, and 254. And people probably think, if you're old school, you think, oh man, I remember the day when Peyton Manning threw for 300 yards per game. Tom Brady, Drew Brees. Yeah, well, guess what, guys? Those days are over. The last 3 years, the average for a starting quarterback is 215 per game. Geno is well over that. So he is a guy that can support multiple weapons in the offense. If you look at his touchdown passes per game, they haven't been quite as good. 1.76 was solid, but then it was 1.33 and 1.24. But the other thing that we do forget about sometimes with Geno, maybe he didn't call us back as us forgetting him. 16 rushing yards per game last year, Ian. 10 the year before, 22 the year before that. So this is a guy that can still, despite the age, he can do a little bit in the scramble department, just enough. And I know you guys hear that like, oh man, what does that matter? Well, 1.5 to 2 fantasy points per game. It actually does matter when we start getting into, splitting hairs between some of these guys that are going as late as where Geno's going. So yeah. I do agree with you. I think that there's definitely upside for Geno. The big question I have is this. It does feel like right now an offense that is, to use one of your terms, Ian, is a death by 1,000 paper cuts. Brock Bowers, underneath target. Jakobi Meyers, intermediate to underneath target. Who's really going to stretch this thing out and open things up with the big plays? Obviously, we think they're going to run the ball, try to use more play action, so Jeanty could help there. But they need someone to step up and give them that big play element. Maybe it is Dante Thornton Jr., the guy they took in the 4th round. But, man, you know the history of round 4 picks. Supermodel, I'll be honest, guys, did not love him as a prospect. But they need someone to really open things up for everybody else. Otherwise, I get a little bit worried about the big playability of the offense.
God, give the Saints a call and get Chris Olave, with a Raider logo on his helmet. Now, he would make every offense in the league better. But you're right, man. Yes. They need that one lid lifter that could really make things better for everyone else involved. So, and again, that rushing, it's not crazy, but you said it, man. It's because he's going next to Matthew Stafford, next to Tua Tagovailoa, guys where I think if Geno goes, runs hot, he can be pretty close to them passing, and that rushing can actually make him the superior fantasy QB. So 16 rushing yards per game, again, last 3 years, may not sound like a ton, more than Justin Herbert, more than Baker Mayfield. We've talked about how that, small part of their game has helped them as well over the years. So look, Geno does have his warts last year, 18 turnover-worthy plays. That was tied with Jameis Winston, usually not very good if you're getting, the same sort of turnover stats as Jameis. Also, only Baker and Kirk Cousins have more total INTs. But man, you do just, again, look at the willingness to take chances downfield and everything. Hey, I think part of that gunslinger mentality is helping out his, completion percentage over expected, but still number 1 over the course of these past 3 years of all the quarterbacks in the NFL in that completion percentage over expected stats. So that from Jeremiah Smith's cousin, a little bit of a fun fact there. But yeah, man, Geno Smith, someone where, again, haven't drafted a ton of Brock Bowers. I've been okay getting Jakobi, but man, I'm trying to build stacks in best ball more times than not. But if I do get screwed, because you've talked about this, Dwain, a lot of people going out there picking 3 quarterbacks this day. And, if you're trying to push your quarterback until later, you can be in a position late where you're just forced to start looking at guys who you haven't gotten. Man, Thornton's going for free. Jack Besh is falling down more than ever. Geno Smith is one of these guys where at the very end of drafts, I like his upside more than most.
Yeah, I'll feel better about that once we have more news from training camp. My one concern with Thornton or Besh is they could be absolute zeros. And really the best way to kill your best ball team is to start right off with some guys that are going to be zeros all year long, right? When you look at the end of the tournament, health is such a huge factor, just like it is in the NFL. And it makes sense, right? You want as many of your players as available to be able to put up a big fantasy score that week and help you in best ball. So I think once we get that, if we do in fact get that information from camp, then I do think that it becomes more in play. Right now, I've kind of leaned more in that scenario to Cam Ward because I can go to Tyler Lockett, who I feel like probably is going to start off, and at least he's going to have a significant role from a route standpoint. Tyler Lockett, like pretty washed, but also we have Chigo Okonkwo, right? I feel decent that he's going to have a role on his offense, but Geno, I think, will be right in there in that same range once we have a better feel for some of the targets that are going after him and where they sit in the pecking order. But it is interesting. Also, the other thing with like where Geno goes versus where all of his weapons go. His weapons are all gone by round 8. And then Geno is one of the guys that go last. So every once in a while, we kind of get that scenario where it plays out that way. Now, don't be wrong, Geno is not like this elite rusher, but there's enough there. Like you said, you put it with that passing upside that he has. He does have people. He offers more ceiling than what people realize. I'll say that about Geno.
And I was surprised to see him actually come out as the 7th, highest volume passer in terms of just raw pass attempts in the fantasy life projections. So yes, obviously Carroll, Chip Kelly, they drafted Ashton Jeanty. They want to run the football, but even those Chip Kelly teams, man, if he is going to get back to using that heavy, pedal to the metal, no huddle pace all the time, they rank 27th, 5th, 6th, and 29th in pass attempts. So yes, some of those are very much, run heavy offenses, but when you have so many plays and maybe a defense that's not exactly going to be helping them out a ton, wouldn't be surprised if we again get a bit more pass game volume than expected in Las Vegas. That said, Dwain, is going to take us to our 7.5 win total discussion. I am not trying to throw shade at Max Crosby. I have some cool stats in my written version of this Raiders team preview about all the amazing things he does and his placement among some of the best edge defenders in the entire NFL. But man, Dwain, I still just have a struggle getting too much behind this. 6.5, I think I'd be willing to take the over. 7.5, I am going to be going with the under here. So, hey, we talked about one that I especially really felt good about pounding. Wouldn't put my confidence level very high at this one. It just feels to me like this is a team a year away from making any sort of real noise in what is one of the toughest divisions in football. Under 7.5, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a coaching improvement. I do think we have a quarterback improvement. So those are two big things. Jeanty, as much as we love him, we know that running backs is really tough for them to really swing the fate of their teams. Like they're really more, not to say that they don't matter. We're not getting this whole running backs don't matter, but at the same time, like it's hard for them to really ultimately win a bunch of games for their teams. If they're on a good offense, they can make that offense really go to that next level. The challenge is we're not at the level we need to be yet with this offense. Again, if they can manage to find what I like the words you use, the lid lifter. If they can find someone like that for this offense, I think it goes a long way. I'm just not confident that it's on the team today. You mentioned Max Crosby, so when you got a guy like that on defense, you always have a chance. But the last 3 years, we've got 4, 8, and 6 wins. So I'm with you. If you're at 7.5, I could buy into the Geno, Pete Carroll upgrade here. We've got Brock Bowers that we like. You add Ashton Jeanty, maybe that's enough. 6.5 to take the over, but at 7.5, it does get tougher.
Again, should at least be a more fun season than what we've seen in recent years. Pete Carroll just tends to give off enough energy and vibes to definitely make that reality happen. So rooting for you Raiders fans out there, but again, just thinking maybe more so 2026, 2027. So guys, that's going to wrap things up here. We invite you to check out fantasylife.com for all these articles and tools. Use code QB10 for Fantasy Life Plus. Get 10% off for there. And otherwise, just have a great day. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.